Welcome to my podcast series, The Best Thing to Design is You. This episode is called Fish Are Friends, Not Food. As women, we really like to talk a lot. We actually pride ourselves on the fact that with other women, we can talk on top of each other and both still hear exactly what's going on. It's like we just love our female friendships, and they mean a lot to us. I think this is partially because we're women and we just get each other, and partially because of the need to share, and really get things off our chest. But sometimes we blur the lines when it comes to our friends, and we've all made those mistakes, haven't we? Telling someone too much or saying the wrong thing or kind of overstepping the boundaries. So what I want to talk about today is specifically that blurring of boundaries and mistaking our friends, female or male, for therapists. But before I get into that, I also want to touch on the big difference between talking to women versus talking to men and why we do talk to women so much. I think the key difference here is how they respond. Remember, women just want to talk sometimes, and we need to do this. Men, maybe not so much. When we start talking to men, they sometimes seem a little impatient. Have you ever noticed that? What they want to do is just listen to you and solve the problem straight away. They want to get straight to the core of it. I'll give you an example. I went to hear Alan Peace speak at a breakfast event many years ago. And if you remember, he was the guy that wrote the book on body language in, I think it was the 80s. There was a girl sitting on the front with her legs crossed and her arms crossed, sort of really making the point. Years later, he and his partner wrote another book, and it was called Why Men Don't Listen and Women Can't Read Maps. In fact, they spent 3 years studying the genetic differences between men and women before they wrote that book. And one of the many conclusions was that women have got 25,000 words a day that we need to get out. Now, that's a lot of words. And men, I think from memory, had about 5,000, which is not so many. And he believes that one of the biggest problems when men and women are communicating is just that. So the example that he gave at the conference was a woman comes home after a huge day and starts telling her partner in great detail how her day went and how it just went pear-shaped really quickly. So she'd been racing to work, jumps on the lift, breaks her heel, and the day starts to go downhill. The broken shoe throws her entire day, obviously, because she's hobbling around and doesn't have time to go and do what she needs to do, and it's just a mess. But she's relaying the entire day just because she needs to talk. And his response is, well, you need to get some new shoes. Now, he solved it. And I'm sure she knew she needed to get some new shoes and just needed to talk. And that is a major difference. Men, on the other hand, can get away with very few words, and they get quite tired of hearing our copious amounts of words. And what he communicated in that conference was the way to do that is you've got to adjust your own communication skills when you're speaking to the opposite sex for the most part. So if a woman's speaking to a man, maybe say less words. If a man is speaking to a woman, maybe let her embellish and listen a bit better. But I'm not going to get into that too much today. I think that the point really was this is part of the reason we like to talk to other women so much. And when we have a problem, we definitely do. It's a real strength that we have, and it can sometimes also be a bit of a weakness. And, sometimes we go too far and we start asking for advice, or they just start giving it without us asking. The next thing you know, you're in a kind of therapeutic sort of discussion, and you know what? Nobody is really qualified. And because you're close to this person, you're probably getting a very, very personal opinion. Okay, you can see where I'm going. I just want to digress for one moment and take you through a movie that I love. I take a lot of inspiration from this movie. It's called Finding Nemo, and I'm absolutely sure everybody's familiar with this movie. Stay with me for a second. I mean, when my son was young, we must have watched that movie 100 times. I think it's actually the first movie that he sat still for any length of time, and he watched it over and over and over as kids do. Because of that, I memorized most of that movie. And there's a particular part that is relevant for this discussion today, and it's the part when Bruce the shark is underwater at an AA meeting, desperately trying not to eat the little fish that he brought along as a friend. Remember, he has an affirmative statement for his AA meeting, or AA similar meeting, I should say. He says, "Fish are friends, not food." And he says it over and over again, trying to convince himself not to eat that little fish, or any other fish for that matter. It's a really hilarious scene, and the fish is over there just shivering in fear, and he finally slips away when he can. Well, I think that can give us an affirmative statement when it comes to our friends. Friends are friends, not therapists. Now, in times of crisis, we're going to turn to them, of course, and we should. It's only natural, and I'm definitely not discouraging it. But what I'd like to encourage is for us to find the balance and understand the limits of our friendships, most especially when you're going through a rough time. I know myself, when I went through a really difficult time, my friends were totally there for me, and I'm really grateful. But because I was so needy, in some cases, people seemed to become pseudo-therapists. When I started feeling better, it became very awkward to change that relationship. So I'm going to leave you with a few important things to think about and consider when it comes to our friends. Keep your friends just that, friends. They're not professionals. Having a situation like that can change your relationship slowly as they become your advisor and you the student. When you do start to recover, it's nearly impossible to get back on equal ground. Therefore, it can change the dynamics of your relationship dramatically. Another downside is you might subconsciously skew the conversation for fear of judgment. And after a while, they can just tire of the whole thing. They actually get a little sick of the situation. That's scary to think about, but it's true. And lastly, you might receive some really bizarre advice and possibly hurt feelings when you decide not to take it. They're just trying to help, but for you, it might not be the right thing. I really believe we need to learn to separate. If you're going through something, it's important to get the right professional help. A therapist, a life coach, professional advisor of your choice, whatever suits you. Someone that is educated, experienced, or qualified in that realm. In other words, a safe place where you can say what you want to and say it anonymously. With a professional, you can say anything. They don't know you, and they're not going to judge you. Knowing that, you might not be as inhibited, and you might just open up even further and therefore help to solve your issues. Even though you think your situation is unique to you, there's a good chance that they've seen something similar before. I went to a couple of different therapists after my trauma, and I am not ashamed to admit it. For the most part, when you go, you do a lot of the talking. And sometimes you might think, well, I'm doing all the talking. What are you doing? But that's not the case at all. I mean, first of all, they're listening to you, which is fantastic. But you will also, if you find the right person, you will get some sage advice. You might get some real words of wisdom. A lot of the stuff that I took in, I desperately feel I can share now. Not desperately, but I feel like, hey, I can pass this on because it was good. My psychologist specifically taught me this. She taught me how to manage advice. How to manage advice that I was getting without insulting my friends that are just trying to help. I mean, let's face it, you love them and you want to keep them. So how do you manage that? She recommended that if they're saying something and you kind of don't agree, and you're nodding though and going, yeah, and smiling, yeah, great, thanks, you're actually implying that you're going to do what they suggest. And then if you don't do it, it kind of depreciates the value of what they've said to you. It's like paying lip service. Now, there's a smart, gentle way around it. If someone is giving you advice and you're thinking, there's no way I'm going to do that, instead of nodding and agreeing, you can say something like, thanks, those are really good ideas. We'll see how it all works out. Or let's see how it works out. Thank you. What you've done there is you've acknowledged the fact that they want to help you, but you've left it open and given yourself an option to decide whether or not you're going to take that course of action that they've recommended. There's another major benefit to keeping your friends and not letting them become your therapists. You aren't giving up your personal power. So if you want to maintain your personal power, even after your trauma, after your event, after your series of issues, you don't become the pseudo student when you're in the midst of it all. It also helps you keep your friendships intact. The real point is this. Yep, women, we love to talk. We need to talk. We need our girlfriends more than anything. It's fabulous. It's powerful. Do it. Keep those friendships. Spend your 25,000 words a day on each other, definitely. But when you want or need true therapy, when things are really going to be life-changing, get the professional help that you need. It is money well spent on you. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want more information or you want to stay in touch, go to debrapascoe.com.